We all know the feeling of enjoying having written more than the actual process of writing. However, if you find yourself hating writing all of the time, it may be time to reevaluate how you're thinking about the writing process. My name is Michael Carr. I'm a literary agent with Veritas Literary, and this is How to Hook an Agent. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel before, you might go ahead and consider subscribing. You'll get my tips and insights about agenting and the publishing world. Also, if you have any thoughts for ideas for videos, please put them in the comments. I'm always interested in hearing what people want to hear about the agenting world. So the problem, as I see it a lot of times, is people are kind of facing burnout, or they are struggling to get anything done in their writing. I belonged to some writing groups back in the day where there was one group in particular I would meet with every summer, and the people would show up for a week and they would work on their writing, sometimes not work on their writing. And throughout the other 51 weeks of the year, they didn't really get anything done. There was one guy who frankly admitted that he didn't really enjoy writing all of that much, and it was a struggle. And you could see it because he never produced anything new. I won't say never, but he rarely produced anything new, and didn't seem to enjoy the process of getting feedback, didn't want to go on revision. And when you talk to him the next year, he didn't have anything new to produce. Similarly, I attended Clarion back in the day, which is a 6-week writing workshop for aspiring science fiction and fantasy writers. And there were a number of people who went to Clarion from my group of about 18 after having invested all that time and money and energy, and they really struggled to put out new stories every week, even though that was essentially all they were supposed to be doing during that period of time. And when they finished Clarion, they didn't ever do any writing again, so far as I can tell, or at least they hadn't in the 10-year period of time after Clarion, when I was still in contact with most of those people. It could be that what you're finding when you don't really enjoy the writing process is you like the idea of writing a lot more than you like actually being a writer. And to a certain extent, if you went to Clarion for 6 weeks and that was all you learned about yourself, it was probably a valuable lesson and maybe worth the time and money you spent, because as everybody knows, this is really, really a tough and challenging process. You have to just put in so many hundreds of hours. You have to invest time and sometimes money in conferences. You have to face the constant drumbeat of rejection coming back whenever you go out on submission with your queries. And a lot of times it's not going to be your first novel or your second or even your fourth novel that finally breaks in and gets an agent to take a chance on you. Then you enter the next circle of hell where you have to go on submission, and there's just no end to the challenge. So what I really want to ask you is, if you are not enjoying the process, you can't deal with the rejection, you're not producing, maybe you produce a little bit, but you're not happy with the result, then it might actually, in fact, be time for you to say, I'm ready to do something else. I know this is really hard to do, especially if you've invested a lot of time and effort into the process. And if you're like me, you're really stubborn. I think I achieved goals as both an agent and as a writer simply by not giving up. I wasn't always enjoying the process, but I was really stubborn. So if you're a really stubborn person like myself, then that advice may sit wrong with you. But first of all, there's no real shame in it. I have some friends who at one point were aspiring writers and who no longer are. They were, when they were younger in college, or they were submitting, and they since found other priorities in life. One of my best friends is like this. He was actually a really good writer. He was definitely better than me at the time we were in the same writing group together, which is how we met each other and how our friendship was formed. Now, when we see each other, still fairly regularly, we just don't really talk about writing very much, except in the same way I might be asking about his job or his career. He has other priorities. I feel like in his case, he has a really healthy attitude towards it. He doesn't seem to pine for it. He has no real angst about it. I think he recognizes that he put in a lot of time, but then he realized he just didn't want to put in the amount of time writing multiple books and facing all the rejection and difficulties in order to break in. I think he would have, but it might have been a cost that he wasn't willing to bear. On a similar note, there was a friend of mine from a writing group who used to really frustrate me because she would, whatever she wrote, she would sell. She would publish in the biggest magazines of science fiction and fantasy and seemed to have no trouble. People would nominate her for awards, but she was writing a story every year or two. And I was so focused on production and seeing someone who had so much more natural ability than I did and who seemed to find it so much easier to move forward, and yet didn't seem to, in my mind, she didn't seem to really appreciate it. I also don't think, I'm not 100% sure, we've been out of contact for a number of years, but I don't think this friend is writing either. At the very least, she had given up temporarily or for an extended period of time the last I heard about her or I was in contact with her. And you know what? This is okay too. You should know exactly what your goals are. It may be that your only goal is to write a memoir that you are going to publish in such a way that only close friends and family are going to see that. It may be, as a memoir writer, that you only have this one book in you and you really don't aspire to be a writer. You just have this incredible story and you want to get that story out there and do the best you can and give it the best shot that it can in the professional marketplace. There is nothing wrong with that. I used to think there was. I used to think everybody should have the same goals in writing and probably in the publishing world and life that I did. And that's because for me, getting involved in publishing, first in writing and then later as a literary agent, was really all I wanted to do. It was a vocation, a calling, a profession for me in a way. It was not I never thought of it as solely a job. Okay, so we've gotten that out of the way. Now let's talk about what's happening if you're really not enjoying the process very much and you're suffering your way through it and it is what you really want to do. Because that can be the case too. There are people who really, really want to do that. And they are starting to look at the amount of production that they're doing and realizing that is not sustainable because of other factors in their life. Writing is taking a backseat to a job or having children or other sorts of life experiences that are getting in the way, and they are finding this frustrating. And there's other people who have the time and are kind of putting in the time, but it's a real struggle for them as they're working and they're not enjoying the process. So the first thing I would do is take a step back and ask yourself this question about how important it is and how you want to prioritize this in your life. Because while it's true that things can get in the way, if you are undergoing chemo, for example, right now, your physical and emotional energy is almost certainly going to make it, if not impossible, then extremely difficult to get anything accomplished in writing at this time. But I'll be honest, a lot of people who I meet at conferences who tell me they don't have time to write, and I ask them, well, what is your job? What is your family situation like? Are you dealing with anything? And the answer is, they're dealing with life. I hate to tell you this, other people are dealing with life too. One of my writers who has a book back on this shelf, for example, is a full-time nurse. Now, you can imagine what being a full-time nurse in a hospital is like during the age of coronavirus. It's not non-stressful. She also has a personal life. I guess I don't want to get into that too much, but like everyone else, she has personal commitments and things in terms of family. And yet she still has a book contract with her publisher and she has deadlines. And one of those deadlines is actually in about a week. And I know she's going to hit it. She's going to come in by the skin of her teeth like most of us do, but she's going to hit it. And she planned her time and prioritized her time. Most people who don't have time for writing have time for other things. There was a guy, once again, going back to a writing group that I had, who was always talking about how busy he was, and yet he seemed to catch every single movie in the theater as soon as it was released. He had a huge collection of music and could talk extensively about that. He knew everything about books and everything being published. So I'll give you a pass for that, because that's work, that's research. But the guy watched his television programs. He was up on all of his popular culture. He was constantly online, blogging and participating in online communities, really, like, to the point of having expending thousands of words of his creative energy in online communities. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm as addicted to the internet and the modern virtual world as any. And I've always got my camera right here, or my phone camera, personal device right here. And, probably the instant I'm done with this, I'll check my email and check my messages and check my online communities like everybody else. But you have to prioritize what is important to you if you want to accomplish anything in this life. The other aspect of life where this comes into play for me is language study. And language study is extremely important to me and a big part of my life. So I take active online classes in 2 of the 3 languages I speak on an almost daily basis. I have one in about 2.5 hours, in fact. And so I have to prioritize the things that are important to me, because language study and writing a book are very similar in that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And in order to accomplish that goal, you have to work towards it every day. Okay, so if you're not enjoying it, then you need to ask yourself, am I working on the right projects for me? Or are you writing in a genre that maybe at one time was more interesting to you, and you have said everything you have to say about that? Are you working on something strictly because you feel like the market wants it and it's not what you'd want to write? I'm not going to tell you not to hit the market, because the market is very important, but look for that overlap between the sorts of things that you like to read and what you might want to write and what you think the market wants, and try to find that sweet spot. You might be writing something different or something wrong. You might try writing something different for a little while. You might, if you enjoy writing, if you're writing novels, but you're struggling with that, try to write a shorter piece. Try to write a nonfiction piece for a newspaper or something along those lines. And then try to set yourself with some sort of rhythm or pattern that is based on you doing daily work. So I think this has a lot to do. I mentioned language learning, but another thing that is very closely related in terms of building up the right sort of habits is an exercise program. If you've ever started off lifting weights or riding a bicycle, an extended distance, running, going to the gym, you know that the first days are very, very challenging. And you also know that the way to make it happen is not by going once a week or once every couple of weeks, or going and running for 3 hours on a Saturday when you haven't gone running throughout the week. The idea is that you are going to build up that habit. And are you going to love it every moment that you're in the gym on the elliptical? No, you're not, but you're going to really like the results, and you're going to feel better about yourself physically and psychologically when you're done. And writing should be the same thing. If you're hating it all the time, maybe this is not for you. But if you find that it's enormously rewarding when you do, try to find a regular time and try to work within that schedule. And then ask yourself, fight through it a little bit, and then ask yourself after, do I feel better when I'm writing? Am I happier with myself? Do I feel more mentally alert and alive? Am I getting anything out of this? If the only thing that's going to make you happy is publication, and you haven't been published yet, that's kind of a problem. Writing needs to be its own reward to a certain extent. And if you're not getting any reward, there's a problem in either your method or possibly the task itself.